Hello and welcome to the Andrew Ferris Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the show. Today I want to talk about media buying, and I want to talk about what I think is the number one skill in media buying right now that I see. I don't know, that's a very marketing clickbait way to say it. The number one skill. It's one of the top skills if it's not the number one skill. And I think it is underrated as a skill. It is hard to find, and it's sort of surprising. It's not, I think, what you think it is. I'm going to get into it. Let's just jump right in. Let me unpack it for you. All right, there was a time in Facebook advertising where a lot of what separated good media buying and bad media buying was knowing the sort of technical ins and outs of how to set up and optimize your ads. And that meant understanding how to build your campaigns the right way and your ad sets the right way and your targeting the right way and why a 1% lookalike audience was the best place to spend money and how to test against the best audiences and how scale worked. If you're starting to unlock things, how do you raise the budget the right amount? How do you allocate the most amount of spend to the best ads and keep money away from the worst ads and kill ads at the right time? All of those kinds of things where you sort of had this platform of delivery with this incredible algorithm. And yet you also wanted this human to be involved somewhere and to use their brain to make things as good as possible, to sort of maximize the output of that platform. And what has happened, if you've listened to this show, this will not be surprising to you. And most people, I think, recognize this at this point, even if you don't take it quite to the level that I do. But what has happened over the last couple of years, 3 years, something like that, is that so much of that human decision-making has been replaced by machine learning. And I want to pause right there and just think about what that sentence indicates. The reason that a human would make all of those decisions was because a human would need to figure out how best to target, first of all, but then also how best to, and this is crucial, really even with targeting, this is crucial. The thing the human was doing was predicting what would happen next. Every one of those decisions can be laddered back to that basic concept. If you were a media buyer at that time, your job was to look at a bunch of data, understand the platform and how that data came to be in that platform, and then make decisions for the future based off of that data. In that respect, you are a constant running forecast. Your decision-making is a constant running forecast. That's what it was. And so the best media buyers were the people who understood the strategy of how to do exactly that. But if you think about this for a second, the place that machine learning has taken over in meta ads is that data-based forecasting is now almost exclusively, or can be almost exclusively, the work of the machine learning instead of the human. That's the baseline idea. And if you think about why that would be good, and I think it certainly is, then the reason you think it is good is because you believe that the machine learning is much better at analyzing the data and predicting the future about what will happen next in the platform than the human. That's the whole baseline idea of concepts like broad targeting, or using cost caps or bid caps or minimum ROAS, or using campaign budget optimization, or a lot of things associated with Advantage Plus advertising on Meta. All of these things in different ways are all ways to remove a human predicting the future and replace it with a machine predicting the future. And of course, both the human and the machine are trying to do this based on data. And so here is the number one skill that I believe a current media buyer does, that I just continue to be amazed. I talk on the show all the time about these kinds of concepts, like how to use the machine learning and to lean on broad targeting. You've seen my episode about why you should use cost controls. Maybe, I'll put that in the show notes. There's a show I did about specifically, media buying rules that you should understand. And that's basically all about machine learning and how to use that and all those things, right? But here's the number one thing I think undergirds all of that separates the best media buyers from those who are not as good. And it's this: the best media buyers trust the machine learning over themselves. That's it. They trust the machine learning over themselves. They believe that data-driven, machine learning-driven optimization and decision-making, forecasting of what's going to happen next, that letting the machine learning have all the decision-making power, or as much of it as possible, into what's going to happen next, is better than their interventions, than their human interventions in those places. And this is something that I sort of naturally have a bent and an instinct to agree with. And like I said, like I talk on the show like this all the time. So it just amazes me over and over and over again to see how many accounts I find where humans are coming in, human media buyers are coming in and making decisions in the ad account specifically to override the machine learning's decisions. So let me like talk about what a few of those are. Like, for example, ad set based budgets instead of campaign budget optimization. The idea that you would assign the budget to individual ad sets in your Facebook ads, and you would assign each ad set its own budget instead of let the campaign distribute the budget amongst your ad sets in the way that the machine believes, quote unquote believes. Machines don't believe things, of course, but the machine, quote unquote, believes is the best allocation of that spend. Humans turning off ads that are being allocated lots of spend because of underperformance, right? So you've got 5 ads there, whether you're running cost caps or not, and your top spending ad is your lowest performing ad. And so you turn it off because you look at the ROAS over a certain period of time and you just turn it off because you don't believe that. No, the machine in that case believes it's the best performing ad. That's why, relative to the goals you've set, as long as you've set the right goals, the machine believes it's the best performing ad. That's why it's spending. It's predicting the future in real time. That's why it's spending on it. And you come in the middle of that and say, it's not going to actually perform as well as these other ads. I can tell because I'm looking at this data. And then you go and turn it off. All right. That's the kind of decision I'm talking about. And there's like a million more of these. I saw one the other day that was somebody who had separated out the placements of their ads. So they were running an Instagram stories only ad placement for an ad. And I pretty for sure know why that happened. They probably looked at the breakdown report by placement of this ad. They saw that it was performing especially well on Instagram stories. It was performing, more poorly on newsfeed and other placements. And so they said, okay, well, let's get rid of all the other placements. Let's put it on Instagram stories only. I have tried that a lot of times in my past media buying. And here's the thing, it never works. It never actually improves your performance, at least not in my experience. I've never really seen it do that. But that's that kind of decision. Instead of letting the machine decide how to allocate that creative relative to the available placements and the available budget and the available demographics and all those million factors that are in there, that's what the machine does. Now, here's the thing that I want to point out about this, about the thing that unites all of these things together. It's that the machine is a lot better, first, at seeing a lot more data than you do. Okay, so that's one of the factors, right? It just is able to take in a whole bunch more information than any human possibly can. Think about all of the factors I just mentioned: ad placement, ad creative, campaign structure, demographics. And what you don't see, of course, is the boatloads of data about every individual Facebook and Instagram user's, browsing history and all of the things that it has access to, spending power, location, number of kids in the home. I mean, there's just like a million different things that separate out people's behaviors in meaningful ways. And the machine learning has access to all of that information in a way that you do not. And it is able, amazingly, to take in large portions of that, who knows how much exactly, but large portions of that, weigh what is going to happen next against other huge, giant, big data sets, against what's happening for all these other advertisers, including your account's history and all these things, and is able to say, here's what I believe will happen next. Believe, again, quote unquote. Here's what I believe will happen next relative to all of these factors and all of this information that I have access to. There is simply no way for you or I or any human, even the smartest people alive, to factor in that many details in our decision-making and in our future prediction. We just can't do it. There's just too much information. Okay? And secondly, of course, they do that without bias. So they didn't just create the ad that they're trying to allocate more spend to than they believe is really good. The machines don't do that. The machine didn't create the ad, and the machine didn't just have a hard conversation with the client about how the account is running and therefore is panicking and trying to make changes. And the machine, as I've said before, the machine's girlfriend never just broke up with it. Okay? So like the machine also slept fine last night. In fact, it didn't sleep, right? So there's all of these other factors that are going in there that create bias and changes to the decision-making that make humans worse at the decision-making. By the way, the machine also isn't overwhelmed by how many accounts it's running at a given time. Like if you're at an agency and you've got 6 accounts and they're all, whatever, breathing down your neck, and you got to build all these ads and you got to run them. Like that, the machine doesn't have that issue. There's all of these things that affect our decision making. But there's actually underneath that something that I think is more important, that I think is really hard to wrap your mind around. And it's this: the machine does a lot better at disentangling process and results. And this is like the results driven decision making of humans instead of the process driven decision making is like a classic problem that data driven people are always thinking about how to overcome. And it's also the white space for a lot of data driven people to make money in the world, right? Like an example of this, like in poker. If somebody sits down and they're an amateur poker player and they make what is a statistically bad bet, but they win, they will think they played well. Like maybe they get a good card as the last card shows up, the river, right? If the river shows up and it's the card that the exact card you needed, even though you should have never even played that hand, or you should not have kept pushing chips in or whatever, and it's relative to a low probability, it gives you the exact card you need to win. That results-driven outcome, the fact that you won the hand, that results-driven outcome is not a good basis for the next decision you make. That doesn't mean you should go and, push a bunch of chips in on another bad hand after that because it worked out last time. But that is the way that humans make so many decisions. I came at this not from a poker background, though that's a place where a lot of people have honed skills like this. I came at this from being a big sports fan. This is the place where I learned data. And I've said this before. I think that like trying to get into the sort of smartest and best minds in sports can be a way for people who love sports to begin to exercise this muscle. But for me, it was baseball. And the examples I always think of in baseball, I'm going to try and explain this, even if you're not a baseball fan, and hopefully it'll make some sense to you. So there's a distinction to be made between what happens before a hitter hits the ball and what happens after a hitter hits the ball. So much of the outcomes of baseball are determined by how many strikeouts and how many walks a pitcher gives up or a hitter has happened, right? So, before the pitch comes across the plate, before the batter can put the bat on the ball, there's not a lot of variance in a pitcher's ability to strike out or walk hitters. There's not a lot of randomness in that. Basically, if they throw good pitches and they throw them to hitters, even if they're pretty good hitters, they're much more likely to strike them out. Those good pitches create the good outcomes that they want. And so the process is to throw good pitches, and the result is getting the good outcomes that they want. And pretty quickly, if you throw good pitches, your results will match your process. You will basically get guys to swing and miss, and therefore, if you throw 10 good pitches, most times it works out for you, right? Now, not that quickly, because you might throw 10 good pitches and somebody randomly hits the ball into the right spot and makes contact on a pitch that they had no business swinging at and whatever, and weird things happen. But pretty quickly there, that's the way it worked out. However, once the bat hits the ball, all kinds of insanity happens. You might just barely hit the ball hit the ball pretty softly, but into the exact right spot on the field. And we know for a fact that players basically can't control this. They basically can't place the ball when they hit it. And so they can't just go look at the field and say, oh, nobody's standing over there. I'll try and hit it over there. There's like huge amounts of evidence that this is the case because it's so hard to hit a ball when it's coming at you that fast. However, they might hit the ball really poorly off the end of the bat instead of the sweet spot of the bat. And the ball just kind of flares up and just drops in. And even though 90% of the time a ball hit at that exact velocity and to that spot would be an out, well, this time it dropped in for a hit. And so the process was bad. They swung at a pitch they shouldn't have swung at. They hit it poorly, but the result was good. And so those results can lie, and it happens all the time in sports. The interesting thing is in baseball today that we can measure all of these process type things that happen. So we know exactly how hard a guy hits the ball, and we know exactly at what launch angle the ball comes off the bat. The angle that the ball comes off the bat, we understand it. Okay? And we also know which direction the ball is going to go, not just the angle vertically, but also horizontally, which direction it goes. We can get very careful data about all those things, and very similar to what I was saying about meta ads, compare that to now what is a pretty large data set of what happened all the other times guys hit the ball like that. They hit it 100 miles an hour, they hit it at a 20-degree launch angle, they hit it to the left side of the field. Well, what normally happens when that happens, right? And you have a sample set to compare that to, okay? And so you can then begin to distinguish between process and results. And like one of the outcomes of that is if you're looking at any player's performance, there's data you can look at to say, boy, this guy, his results are pretty bad so far, but actually the underlying process numbers, which are all aggregated on a website, right? Those underlying process numbers actually suggest he's consistently hit the ball hard, even though his results are bad. he's consistently hit the ball really, really hard and he's not striking out too much. And so if he's hitting the ball really hard, but he's not getting good results, one interpretation of that is that he's bad because the results are bad. Another interpretation of that is that he's been really unlucky. He's been hitting the ball straight into a guy's glove every time he hits it. And even though 80% of the time these hits would all be hits or doubles or home runs or whatever, right? In this case, he hit it and it just happened to go right at the guy that was the fielder on the other side of the field. And so you can make that distinction. And I started thinking about that all the time. I started noticing it all the time. And if you watch any sports, you'll see this where, especially, baseball is sort of the clearest example of this, I think, but you'll see this where a guy, if you turn on any baseball game, you'll see a guy hit an absolute rocket to where any reasonable person could look at that and go, that guy hit the crap out of that ball. Surely that was good. And then he hits it into somebody's glove. And here's the point. That distinction between process and results is happening in your ad account. You have a good ad and the account is serving your ad and it's serving it to more and more people because the machine learning is able to see the process. It's able to see all of that velocity off the bat and the launch angle. It understands all of those details and can use that data to predict what will happen next very, very well. And you probably can't. Whereas it's not too hard to untangle that stuff in baseball these days because there's so much information available and the sort of right amount of information is highlighted to you. It's incredibly hard to see that in a meta ads dashboard because that information is much less clear. And the great skill of the media buyer today is to trust that the machine learning is better at interpreting the process so that in the long run, the results work out. Because guess what? If a guy in baseball keeps hitting the ball hard over and over and over and over and over again, and the sample set gets larger and larger and larger and larger, pretty much inevitably, he's going to have good results to match the good process. He pretty much will at some point. And that's going to be true in your ad account too. I seriously believe, this is why one of my rules of media buying is that spend is performance. As long as your optimization is set correctly, as long as there's nothing weird going on, there's, whatever. All outliers being accounted for, and those outliers, by the way, are often actually just human errors. As long as that's the case, if the account is spending on your ad, it's working. You just have to have the discipline not to touch it, to keep your finger off the trigger. And if media buyers would get really good at starting to locate the places where they are behaving in a way that is out of touch or out of keeping with what the machine learning is telling them is best, where they're building their account structure in a way that is out of touch with what the machine learning is best, I guarantee you their results would get better because the machine learning is better at predicting the future than you. It is. And therefore, if you can figure out how to harness that and utilize that and leverage that by not getting in the way of that, you will be an elite media buyer. And I believe it is actually an incredibly hard skill to have the discipline to see an ad that is not performing for some reason and to say, I'm not going to take control. I'm going to let the machine learning maintain its control. Now, I have to speak by nature of this podcast to a general audience that accounts for a lot of situations. And so it's possible that you actually should at some point turn off that ad, but it's not for the reasons that you think. It's not because Meta is misallocating the spend. It's because there's something else wrong. Like for example, it's producing an AOV much lower than other ads, but you're optimizing for lowest cost. And lowest cost is going to get you the cheapest conversion. And so if the AOV is the cheapest, then it's going to get you, if it is the lowest, then sometimes you're going to get the lowest price conversion out of that, and it won't actually produce a good outcome, and blah, blah, blah. It'd be something in the details like that. And that is also another important thing for media buyers to keep right. But all of the things being equal, then if you're able to learn how to build everything in your setup to leverage machine learning as well as possible and to get your brain out of the decision making, things will perform better. I know that for many people that's counterintuitive, but it is the case. And again, I would just encourage you to go flex these muscles, strengthen these muscles by going looking at poker or sports or something like that. Go somewhere where you can go and see this kind of thing in action. You will see it and hopefully believe it and have some conviction in it, or just start running your ad account that way and see the results get better. And maybe that'll be the thing that drives conviction for you, because no matter how much I say it, until you see it in the results, you're probably not really going to believe it. But that is it. That's the number one skill. And that's the number one thing I'd be looking for if I was hiring a media buyer, if I was on the operator side of this. I would want to know that they are building the account structure in a way that leverage machine learning first and foremost, and that got their brains out of the way. All right, thanks so much for listening and maybe watching this episode today. I am trying as best as I can to start getting these episodes onto YouTube. I might even upload the backlog of them at some point, just audio-only files. But for once, I've actually recorded now the video as well. And it is, if you've watched this and I seemed awkward, well, sorry. It's new for me to do these long-form sort of soliloquy episodes on video. I'm not used to it. So thanks for bearing with me. Hey, if you have any feedback about the show, I would love to hear it, including if you think I suck on camera. That's fine. Please tell me. I would like to know. Email podcast@ajfgrowth.com. I'd also love to hear from you. You can reach out to me on Twitter @AJFGrowth. No, that's not right. @Andrew J. Ferris. AJF Growth is my website. @Andrew J. Ferris. You can reach out to me on Twitter there. All those links are in all the normal places. I would also love if you would subscribe, if you would share, if you'd rate and review. All those things really help, and I really appreciate it when you do that, especially sharing with a friend. If this episode was useful to you, if there's somebody who you want to tell, hey, stop messing with my ad account, then send them this episode, and maybe it will help them. And maybe it won't. Maybe they'll just get mad at you and keep messing with it. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. As always, I will see you next time.